Well, good evening. Welcome to Yada Yahowah Radio. We're here with both Kirk and Dee. This evening's program, after we complete the news, is going to be our second episode of Q&A, so we'll start that here momentarily. I did want to cover some items in the news, however, first. With the all the discussion about Trump being indicted for the calamity of January 6th, which I have shared my perspective on that day of January 6th as this was occurring. I watched the live broadcast of what occurred, continuous broadcast of what occurred for about 4 hours, maybe even 5. And, you know, my view is, of course, that I'm dumbfounded that people would find so much substance for their lives in politics, and I'm always amazed that people become groupies of politicians and believe the rhetoric of politicians, and so I'm always dumbfounded by the propensity of people to be either right wing or left wing politically, and Trump is always been an enigma because the policies of Donald Trump are typically pretty good. I'd say in 8 out of 10 things that he does, they actually are pretty sane and work out fairly well. In his rhetoric, you'd have to say that 9.5 out of every 10 things he says are borderline insane. So, you know, the man is really quite an enigma. Anyway, listening to his speeches on January 6th, you have to realize he was not part of the crowd that went to the U.S. Capitol. Clearly, 99.9% of those who went to the U.S. Capitol, the worst thing they could be accused of is trespassing on public property. And if that is such a low-level misdemeanor, there would never be a trial for any of that. 99.9 of them were unarmed and were not violent, and really did no harm. Now, those that actually broke windows to get into the public building of the U.S. Capitol and who were belligerent inside, which is probably less than 0.1% of those individuals, there ought to have been some legal ramification for doing so, but the legal ramification, so long as they were not involved in physically harming anyone, and obviously there was no meaningful amount of property that was damaged, you're dealing with misdemeanors and maybe months in jail. And some of these guys have gotten 10, 12-year prison sentences. And the only way that can happen is if you have what is a political lynch mob. And the way that you can do that is that you have trials in exceedingly politicized areas where it would be impossible to get a jury to be anything other than out of their mind, progressive, and liberal. So now as Trump is going to face this music, and even though he was not there at the time and he asked the people to leave, what they're saying is that if he is brought up on charges there, that it's a guaranteed loser, that there is no defense that will work. And the reason for that is quite simple. The jury pool, because of this trial, will come from the deep blue D.C. area and therefore be comprised of liberals, which is why it has become a lynch mob. I think that is grossly unfair and inappropriate. This week, the Likud coalition finally passed the first item of judicial reform, and when they did, you'd think the sky is going to fall. Israel is a house completely divided. This is basically what happened to Israel during the time of the Greek occupation under the Maccabees. It is what happened that brought Pompey into Judea as the first Roman invasion. when two brothers were vying for power. It is what happened that caused the temple to be destroyed in 70 CE. It is most certainly what happened with Rabbi Akiba and the false Messiah Bar Kokhba. Jews going at each other's throat have invited oppression and invasion of their homeland many times, and they're doing it again. Netanyahu told a ABC in an interview that what he did was a minor correction, something that would be normalized in any democracy, and he's right in that regard. The problem of Israel, it has no constitution and it has no Bill of Rights. Therefore, there's no guardrails to keep the judiciary hemmed in on a sweet spot that makes sense in a government. In the United States, the Supreme Court cannot rule on anything other than the U.S. Constitution. In Israel, there is no Constitution. There's no Bill of Rights, so there's no guardrails. So going back some 20 years ago, an exceedingly liberal Israeli came up with the idea of the Supreme Court rendering opinions on everything and using a reasonableness standard, which was nothing but a liberal person's opinion, as to whether or not a elected official and government could pass a law. And it is absurd. And it's deeply troubling that the Biden administration would condemn Israel for doing something that has to be done. And it is absurd in Israel that you would have hundreds of thousands of people protest, including IDF officers who are not showing up for duty, over something that is absolutely necessary. If they don't do this, you can kiss your country goodbye. And the other part of it is I can understand to some degree, if they just be honest about it, the opposition. Now, not in the case of Lapid. I think Lapid is one of the most dangerous people in the history of Israel. And he is a self-serving egomaniac that would prefer to bring Israel down if it meant that he has a chance of becoming prime minister again than he would anything else. He is an exceedingly dangerous and irrational individual. But the problem with this is Netanyahu's regime should have passed the entire bucket of wish list items, including the appointment of justices and the parameters on which they could rule, make decisions, all in one fell swoop. They should have done it very early. They should have not hesitated when there was protest, because all they did is encourage the protests when they postponed things for the protest, such that even this time the compromises that were ignored were all postponed for a year, which would have exacerbated the problem. So I have a problem with that, and I understand the leftists because, for example, there is a United Torah Judaism is now proposing that Torah study, which is really Talmud reading in Yiddish and in Aramaic, having nothing to do with Yahowah or his Torah, but that studying Judaism be equated to IDF service, such that the Haredim do not have to defend Israel, and they can get paid to sip their coffee, have snacks, and read their disgusting, corrupting books. Under their view, of course, their behavior is more beneficial for Israel's defense than is the IDF. So I'd like to put that to the test sometime. The next time we have rockets being fired from Gaza, or Hamas invading Israel, or an outbreak of terrorism from Jenin, all we need to do is station 20 Haredim reading their books at one side and 20 IDF soldiers on the other, and see which one prevails. I'm open to the test.
Yeah, me too.
Speaking of being a progressive nincompoop, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres warned on Thursday of this week, which would have been yesterday, that the era of global warming has ended. Yep. It has now been replaced by the era of global boiling. I didn't know if you knew, but the climate has risen to the point now where average temperatures, have reached the boiling point. We're not dealing with temperatures of 90 and 100 degrees. No, we're dealing with temperatures over 200 degrees. You probably didn't know it, but the oceans are actually boiling, and so are rivers and streams. We will soon be out of water entirely. We have entered the era of global boiling, and he is not full of hyperbole. He says, climate change is here, and it's terrifying. Oh, my God, and it's just the beginning. The SOB's answer is that only dramatic, immediate climate change action can save the planet. I've said this 1,000 times, but if every viable economic entity in the world were to say tomorrow, we're not going to make products and services. We're not going to supply gas for your car, electricity for your home. We're not going to make air conditioners. We're not going to make stoves or ovens. We're not going to make refrigerators. We're not going to make cars. We're not going to produce food. We're not going to do any of those things.
Medicine.
We're not going to produce medicine. All we're going to do is fight climate change. All resources to save the planet. First of all, we'd all die. But
yep.
Even with us all gone, we wouldn't make a 5% difference in the nature of the planet's climate. It is the most absurd notion in the world, and the fact that people continue to be buffaloed by it is stunning. I mean, the fact is, the Earth has proven long histories, 300 to 600 year cycles of global warming and global cooling. The global warming periods are good for humanity. The cooling periods are bad for humanity. We entered the last warming period around 1850, and it will last anywhere from 300 to 600 years, or until Yahweh decides that's enough. Speaking of enough, there was video released this week of little girls, some crying, and video of what was called a camp for genital mutilation. Now, that is not something you hear very often. It's a camp for genital mutilation. It was in Conakry, Guyana. And this article goes on to say that while genital mutilation is banned in Guinea, it is still widely practiced. A woman who was asked to comment on it says, I didn't think that I could see in the 21st century something like this, that I thought mindsets were starting to shift. The gall to publish that. I underwent genital mutilation myself, and it's something you live with until you die. She didn't mention the cause, did she? She didn't mention why it was not declining. She didn't mention why she had been played for a fool and thought that, well, it happened to me, but I thought that it would go away. The article concludes with, often these camps are held during vacation at a home of a woman who is carrying out the mutilation. She might have a dozen children there, and they might stay at camp for up to a month's time. The woman feeds them, and she instructs them in the traditional values, like keeping your mouth shut and only speaking when you're given authorization. However, sometimes there are lessons on good values for human relationships. 97% of women in Guinea have had their genitals mutilated. So, you would think with all of that information, somebody would have mentioned the reason that it is common. Oh, this is what they wrote. There are several reasons why genital mutilation is carried out. That could be for cultural reasons or traditions. Some people say that their grandparents did it. People think that they should do it. There could, oh yes, these children are saying, my grandmommy did it, so I should do it too. You're right.
Yeah, right.
They could be economic reasons because it's a source of revenue for the people who carry it out. And it can be related to ideas of dignity and honor. It is also related to a desire of patriarchal society to control the sexuality of a growing girl. And why is it that it's always the mothers who perpetrate this on the daughters? Somebody forgot to look up the demographics of Guinea. What percentage of Guinea do you suppose is
Muslim?
Yep.
Try 95%. There is your problem. If you are not willing to speak out against Islam, then you are aiding and abetting the mutilation of hundreds of millions of little girls. I read some things sometimes and I just shake my head and wonder, how can anybody in a position of authority be so stupid? Defense Minister of Israel, Yoav Gallant, is considering trying to form a unity government with opposition party leaders Yair Lapid of Yesh Atid and Benny Gantz of the National Unity Party to ease the rift in society caused by the coalition's judicial overhaul plans. First of all, the rift in society is not based upon the coalition's judicial overhaul plans, but the response of Lapid and Gantz to those plans. And Lapid is a progressive communist. He's like the Satan of Israel. Looks the part, plays the part. To trust him in a coalition that can dissolve the government one day just by saying, we don't want to play anymore, goodbye, government's over, you'd have to be insane. And Benny Gantz has come on over and over again. And Benny Gantz is interesting in that Benny Gantz is a moderate to conservative. He fits much better with Likud than he does with Lapid and the liberals. But he got bent out of shape the last time that he formed a coalition government with Netanyahu that was going to allow him to share a term, and Netanyahu backed out of that agreement. So he's got his, panties all in a bunch. So he's not going to do it. So why would you, as a member of Likud, as the top Likud member in the coalition's ministry, make such a stupid statement? Hey, there would be a 0% chance that such a coalition would hold together or that it would be of any value. That story that I shared with you about the addition to a basic law, United Torah Judaism, the first clause of that bill, I should share with you, says Torah study is a supreme value in the heritage of the Jewish people. If it was actually the Torah, it would be true, but that's not what they study. The first clause of the bill, called the Basic Law, says the Torah study is this value in the heritage of the Jewish people. The second clause says the state of Israel is a Jewish state, views the encouragement of Torah study and Torah students with the utmost importance regarding their rights and duties to those who dedicate themselves to studying Torah for an extended period and should be viewed as having served a significant service to the state of Israel and the Jewish people. They are absolute parasites, a complete waste of time. They have no education. They don't study math. They don't study the sciences. They don't study English. They speak mostly Yiddish. They have no job skills. Most do not work. And all they do is go play religious dress-up and treat women as if they have no value and degrade the nation of Israel. And they have themselves no rights. They're not allowed to think or act on themselves. The rabbi dictates everything that happens in their lives. It is an absolute waste of humanity. Last month, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announced plans to visit China. Xi not only said that he welcomes him to China, but says he's tremendously looking forward to the visit. Israel's second largest trading partner is China. And China is the dominant player now in the Middle East. And so Netanyahu, of course, is going to China. But his own internal actors are saying, oh, no, can't do that, bad thing. You're going to upset America. America can't harm U.S.-Israeli interests. Tamir Haman and other former heads of military intelligence said, it's a very special relationship we have with the United States. It's in danger. Don't go to China. What did Biden just do? Didn't he send his Secretary of State just recently to China? Hasn't he met with China over and over again, including fairly recently? So it's okay for the United States to meet with China. It's not okay for Israel to meet with China. Is Israel a vassal of the United States?
I apparently think so.
Apparently. While we weren't looking, Hamas decided to raid an Islamic Jihad mosque in Gaza. They actually broke the imam's hand, and it was quite a melee. The video of the whole thing was pretty amazing. But imagine that. Hamas terrorists went in and raided Islamic Jihad mosque because, well, in the nature of Islam has all to do with who's in power and who's being enriched. We read on this program just recently that the United States was considering offering Ukraine cluster munitions. And we talked about how unbelievably stupid that was. Do you know that within a week of the time the United States says we're considering doing it, that Ukraine was using them?
Yeah.
So they had not only been decided upon, but shipped, and were in the field, and had troops trained to use them about a month before it was discussed. I read these things, and you just wonder what's happening. Seymour Hersh had an article this week where he was talking about the stupidity of Ukraine. He says, there is no exit strategy, there's no legitimacy. He says, the fact of the matter on the Ukraine is that they went into the Ukraine for the same reason the United States would go into Mexico if China decided to turn Tijuana into a military outpost for China and station their nuclear submarines and their aircraft carriers and large numbers of troops in Tijuana. The United States would not tolerate that and would act the same way that Putin did. And he says, and yet that's what we did in Ukraine. We gave him no choice, and then we are allowing well over $100 billion of weaponry to be squandered there, killing Russians and Ukrainians. For what? There is no end in this. There is no winning. The offensive, the Ukrainian assault to reclaim territory has completely failed. When the Crimean Bridge was recently damaged again, it was U.S. operatives, U.S. weapons. The whole thing is now the U.S. in war against Russia. And even Seymour Hersh, who is a liberal, saying the only explanation for such stupidity on behalf of the Biden administration is that the promises that were made on behalf of Biden's son when he was rewarded and bribed as part of the Ukraine. Incredibly sad. As we conclude the news, President Biden is now claiming that he is such a spendthrift, that he is such an economic wizard, that he says, in my first 2 years in office, I have reduced the deficit by $1.7 trillion, more than any president in just 2 years. Of course, it's ridiculous, and it's soon to be overtaken by far worse numbers. The only reason that the deficit went down in the first year is that Trump had come up with that remember the 400 how many? I mean, it was stunning numbers of money, but $4 trillion COVID relief package. And with $4 trillion as part of the COVID relief package, the deficit went up to an unprecedented level, around $3.1 trillion. And then his renewals, rather than saying, well, we need another $4 trillion, his Build Back Better and a number of other initiatives failed to get passed, and therefore the deficit fell to $1.4 trillion when he was unable to pass additional stimuli. So the difference was $1.7 trillion, only because you're comparing the $4 trillion package that Trump had passed. And then, of course, this year, now that he is past all that, the deficit is expected to be exactly what he claimed he saved, and increasing back to $1.7 trillion. It is a lovely way to play with the numbers. All right, so that's the news. Unless you guys have something to add, and we'll take. I think we have a bunch of questions, so we'll see how many that we can get through today. Okay. What is our first question?
First question. Since contemporary Orthodox Judaism teaches that Satan doesn't exist, what is the best way, in your opinion, to approach dissolving that myth when sharing Yahweh's words with Jews coming out of Orthodox Judaism?
Well, why don't we start with reading Zakaryah 3, beginning in 1 and 2, and ask yourself, who is that is listed as Hasatan? And once you get past that, why don't you read 1 Chronicles 2:1, which says that because of Satan's influence in Israel, Dowd had to respond to muster a defense. But it goes way beyond that. When you're dealing with Bereshit, Genesis, that story refers to the adversary as a serpent. When he is being discussed in Yeshaya 14, he is given a name, Hillel ben Shakar. Some places he's called the Leviathan. Some places he is called the snake. Some places he's called the serpent. And sometimes he's called Habel, the Lord. There are many names. There's times when he's referred to as the Assyrian. So where we're given a specific name, Hillel ben Shakar, and we're given a job description, adversary, and we're given a metaphor, snake, serpent, Leviathan. We're given another title, which would be the Lord, Baal, because each of these things helps explain how he operates, how he uses a serpentine approach, how he is venomous, how he likes to lord over people, how he is adversarial to our interests. So to claim that there is no Satan is about as credible as Judaism's claiming that Yahweh's name cannot be pronounced. or that they're looking for an unnamed Messiah, or that the first four mikra were not fulfilled, or that matzah doesn't exist. Pesach is really a 7-day celebration. I mean, take your pick. There's a reason that the Jews admit there's no salvation in Judaism. Did you want to add something to that, Kirk?
No, I was just saying, as most of us who've been doing this a long time, I'm not sure, number one, that you can, and not to avoid the direct answer, but I don't think you can dissuade most religious people from their indoctrinated beliefs. They have to walk away, and that's the first step in becoming going to Yah to begin with. So for that, I don't know of a single person that I have met and talked to at any degree where they didn't go to Yada Yah, because in early days that was the number one source and the only source really. And then Intro to God. Those are the two places that actually reveal Yah's plans, the terms and conditions. I mean, that's where you start if you want to engage someone after they've decided to walk away.
Yeah.
Beyond that, who cares?
Yeah.
Satan is fighting back and forth anyway.
Hasatan is a name, particularly if you back out the references in Job. It's not used a lot. Satan is used, I think, like 6 or 7 times as a verb. It appears 17 times in the Masoretic text. Most of those happen to be, though, in Job. But there is so much of an emphasis on this adversarial influence. He's described by Dowd in the role of Gabriel during the time that he dates his arrival to fulfill the first 4 Moed Mikra. It is detailed, just excruciating detail in the role that he'll play, where he'll come from, what his attitude is, what his intentions are, and Yeshaya 14. You really have to eliminate enormous swaths of Torah and prophets to pretend that Satan doesn't exist. And one of the things too is that even Rosh Hashanah, it's in Jewish religious lore, it's based upon fooling Satan. So I think the problem there is that rabbis will say and do anything that makes them popular, and pretending there's no Satan, since there's no salvation in Judaism, is a pretty clever trick.
Wow.
I had a thought on that, if you don't mind me butting in.
Sure.
I've run into this quite often with Jews online. Maimonides, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, he's responsible for this train of thought. Not all Orthodox Jews believe this, but he was able to chalk it up to what they call Yetzer Hara, which is an evil impulse that comes from men and not some spiritual intervention. And that he described that it prevents human beings from submitting to divine will. Well, there's just so many flaws there. It's just not true. And so for any Jews listening, like Craig is telling you, read the Torah. It clearly states there is, and the rabbis are just absolutely lying. There's just no other way around it. So it's important.
The fact is that most human malfeasance comes from religion and politics. The gang mentality of humanity is bankrupt. And so when men and women get together within religious and political organizations, they act exceedingly badly. And they do not need a Hasatan, an adversary, a snake, a serpent, or Helel ben Shakar to egg them on. But when it comes to the really big things, like the creation of Judaism, the creation of Christianity, the creation of Islam, affecting billions of people, that in those cases, Adolf Hitler's Nazi Germany, in those cases, there is a strong satanic influence. Paul specifically admitted to being demon-possessed. Muhammad specifically not acknowledged that he was demon-possessed. So in those big areas, I think there's no question that there's satanic influence, particularly in religion, because that is Satan's goal. He wants to be worshipped as if he were God. But outside religion, man is quite capable of being demonic.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so do you have another question on your list? I think it's we go well beyond 2, don't we?
Who exactly are the Zarowa, and how many are there?
Yeah.
You want to take it, or
sure? The reality is that there was a time when I would have said there was one, because the Torah defines the Zarowa as the sacrificial lamb. But unfortunately, the one that I would have applied it to doesn't actually exist. That would be Yahowsha. The Zarowa, according to Yahowah, is primarily and overwhelmingly Dowd. In the 89th Mizmowr, we read it just in the first third of the Mizmowr. The title Zarowa was applied to Dowd 3 different times. The title Messiah was applied to him once. King was applied to him once. So there really is no more important title ascribed to Dowd than Zarowa. We're also told, and I think it's in Yashaya, but we're also told that Moshe was a Zarowa. Zarowa can mean many things. It means a strong arm, and it's a strong arm of God. It can mean a protective shepherd. It can, but it primarily speaks of a sacrificial lamb. But it's also one, because it's based on Zerah, who sows seeds which take root and grow, producing fruit. So there is actually a third Zarowa. So there are 2 monumental Zarowas. Dowd, or Moshe is Zarowa 1, and the great Zarowa, Zarowa 2 is Dowd, and then there's a pipsqueak Zarowa, only because Zarowa is such an important concept to convey to God's people, that their Messiah and King, the very Son of God, served as the sacrificial lamb, as the Zarowa, and that is his most important accolade and achievement, that it is an essential part of our understanding. And over the last 3,000 years, nobody has gotten it, has understood it. Mm-hmm. So the first person to take this essential title and announce that it is being used to describe Dowd and what he did at the most important time of his lives is here and now. And that's the reason why even Yashaya 53 is introduced with, "Are you aware of the witness that has come to know the identity of the Zarowa?" And so my buddy Yashaya also, and both he and there's a reference in the Torah from Moshe that ascribe the pipsqueak, the guy who is not the strong arm of God. He is not the protective shepherd. He's not the sacrificial lamb, but he is one sowing the seeds which will take root and grow to announce the actual identity of the important Zarowa, most important Zarowa, Dowd. And so I am the pipsqueak, as I like to refer to it in the text, the little z. So there are 3 of them, is the direct answer to your question.
Awesome. Sure, we'll go to the next one. You want to read some, Dee?
Sure, I'll take 3. They ask, is Yahowsha just a title or is it a name? Is it inappropriate to use Yahowsha and Dowd interchangeably? And is Dowd the real name that the Pesach Lamb went by in his second life?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I don't think anybody was using the mission statement, if you will, Yahowsha, from Yah was name, and Yasha, the verb to liberate and save, prior to the writing of these books, Yada Yah. And now I'm devoting what will be 2 years of my life to eliminate that name. So I think that 22 years ago I was the first to use it. and explained that it was primarily a mission statement. And now I will spend 2 years of my life erasing it from the text. So I like to use my time in the most productive way. So I can assure you I would not be spending 2 years of my life. And it's not just me. Jackie and the edit team are right with me. JK, Mike, Molly, Todd. This is a real collective effort to get the text right. So the answer to your question is there is a person named Yahowsha. He was Moshe's successor, and he's a very important person. His name is Yahowsha ben Nun, but that's the last of the Yahoshas. Well, there actually is a high priest that is being dressed down, and that meeting with Satan and Zakaryah 3. But he is a bit player and not of importance. So no, I do think it's inappropriate to use the name Yahowsha. I thought my original reasoning was sound, and I have learned that no, that's just not true. And one of the reasons that you're long for it is that it's one thing to say that the Christian New Testament is wrong about many things. It's another thing to say that the focus of the Christian New Testament is a myth. And that's what you basically come to when you realize there's no Yahowsha, that it was Dowd who fulfilled the Moed Mikre, therefore there were no disciples, and that the entirety of the story from beginning to end, as it is presented in the Christian New Testament, is a fantasy at the level of the Odyssey. Mm-hmm. And that's where you come to. And so it is that kind of a dressing down. So no, there was no Yahowsha. Yahweh does save, that is true, but he saves the same way he does everything, and that's he chooses someone to work through. And the person he chose to work through in this case actually chose to do this and asked for the right to do it. And that would be his son, the firstborn, Dowd. So Dowd is the name of the individual who fulfilled Pesach, and I don't think he kept that a secret in his second life. I've just finished, though, writing vociferously about this subject, and we'll cover it shortly, and a rewrite of Volume 5 of Yada Yah. And in Volume 5 of Yada Yah, I'm dealing with, in fact, just tearing to ribbons Acts 2, as it describes allegedly the fulfillment of Shabuah, and it is completely rotten from beginning to end. And one of the things that I say is that that it is an extraordinary set of circumstances, because Dowd as Gabriel, when reporting what he was going to do and the specific day he was going to do it and how his people were going to respond to him as the Messiah, that Dowd is telling his people, this is what I am going to do, why I'm going to do it, and exactly when I'm going to do it and how you're going to respond. In the 22nd Mizmowr, he says, this is what's going to happen to me as I fulfill Pesach, Matzah, and Bikurim. When Yeshayah wrote the 9th chapter, what we call the 9th chapter now, he said, this child will be born, this son will be given. His name, by the way, is Dowd, and these are the things that he's going to do. And then in Yeshayah 53, it explains exactly what is the reasons that Dowd is going to take on our guilt on Pesach and Matzah. And so what you have is this enormous swath of information, all the way, in fact, it's mentioned one way or another in the first 30 Mizmowr of detailed eyewitness accounts of exactly what's going to happen, when it's going to happen, to whom it's going to happen. And so when it happens, there's nothing more to say. We were told when it was going to happen, who was going to do it, and exactly what would transpire. And so when it actually transpired, there was nothing more to say. So there's no purpose whatsoever for this balderdash of the Christian New Testament. It's all untrue anyway. And one of the things that Dowd said when speaking as Gabriel, God's most capable and competent individual, when relaying what he was going to do and how he's going to do this, is understand that when I do this, it's going to bring an end to prophecy. There will be no more prophets. There will be no more divine revelation. So there were no prophets available. There's no one that God could have worked with to say this is what happened. And even more important, prophecy is explaining what's going to happen in the future, writing it down in the past, so when it does happen as it was explained, you can trust the source. Prophecy is not writing a contemporaneous historical account. That's what men do.
Mm-hmm.
So as it was happening, it wouldn't be prophecy. And there were no prophets. So you can throw away the entirety of the Christian New Testament. The only reason even to discuss it is to understand how this monster operates and how it legitimizes its quest to haunt and torture and demonize Jews, and to help free some Christians from it, and Jews from it. So, it was Dowd, and you don't have to worry about the fact that the Christian New Testament has a misnomer, Ayusu, who became Jesus, because no such individual ever existed. I guess that's a long answer.
Awesome.
3. So,
I enjoyed it.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, what's next?
So on Taruw'ah in 2001, they asked, can you please explain how the passage from Psalms 91 happened to be in your pocket?
Nope. I have no idea. I assume that Yahweh put it there. But I pulled it out. I read it. It answered my questions. I said, okay, you win. I'm not going to fight this. Thank you very much. Should I have asked for more? I read it. I was impressed that it performed as designed, listen. There is a tendency of even covenant members, but of people in general, to get caught up in the details as to what may have transpired or how things are going to work, as opposed to the big picture. How that ended up in my pocket is a detail. I don't care how God did it. In fact, if it was a miraculous printing and a miraculous insertion, it wouldn't impress me. If it was just something as commonplace, it wouldn't bother me, because that's not what matters. What matters is was asked to do something. I had objections. I was encouraged to negotiate, and the answers were given to me, and the answers are profound, and the answers have all been honored. It's been 22 years since that time, and I've done many things that no one in human history has ever done. And everything that I was asked, that I asked for, that was offered, has been fulfilled exactly as was promised. And for Yahweh to have something like that said, written 3,000 years ago, to apply to that time, that's the big picture. That's what impresses me. How it got there is never even thought about it. I'm not even curious. I guess that's strange, because people are looking for miraculous things, and I think the miracle is in the power of the words.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Shall we move on to we get a question? This question often. How and where I read Yahweh's Torah? I am cynical of anything I find online, and I want to read it as Yahweh intended without any Paulisms. And I noticed that Yahweh's Torah is not supplied on your website. Where do I find a trusted source?
So the Torah is not the. Did I read that correctly or heard that correctly? The Torah is not supplied on the website.
Well, I don't know.
Can I just make one suggestion, which is on the website. David, who is spectacular for us. I dearly love what David has done, and he and Jackie in particular work so beautifully together. But they've done something that, and this is probably a year old now, but that I asked for, and they found a way to do it that is beautiful, which is an index. And you go to the top of the YadaYah.com website, and you will see one of the things in the header says index. And if you click index and you start with the first 5 books, what you will find is that we have translated almost all of Bereshit, Genesis. It's all there. So if there's something in Bereshit, Genesis you want to read, chances are it's not only translated in one place, but in multiple places. I mean, sometimes it appears 5 and 6 times in these volumes. You then go to Shemot, Exodus, and vast majority of it is presented. Korah, Leviticus, particularly as it relates to the presentation of the Moed Mikre and the what the Yobel represents, it's detailed. It's all there. I'm going to say that okay, I haven't done all of Numbers. It's a little hit and miss there. I'm not quite as into the genealogies as my friend Dee, who put together that wonderful timeline. But when it comes to Devarim, oh my goodness,
yeah.
There's not significant sections of Devarim that we have not covered. So if you want to read the Torah as presented in Yada Yah, go to the index and pick your spot and go. Now our approach has been to go.
Some of this online.
Yeah, and my approach too has been, it's one integrated whole. Torah, prophets, Psalms, one thing. The Torah is full of prophecy. The prophets are full of Torah teaching. And so my fun in this whole thing is seeing how the whole picture fits together and how all the details work to compose this portrait of who Yahweh is, what he's offering, and what he's asking in return. And so the entire emphasis is, let's go and translate the portions of the Torah, the portions of the Mizmowr, and the portions of the Naby prophets that help us see the picture clearly of who Yahweh is, what he's offering, and what he's asking in return. And that, to me, is more interesting than just sitting there and doing a translation of the Torah without commentary or without trying to integrate these things to form a clearer picture.
Yeah,
what were you going to say, Kurt?
No, I was just going to say that's an awfully good answer. A lot of this, if your concern is are these reliable, then of course you're going to have to do some work yourself. You're going to have to get in a lineary, some lexicons, and so forth, and dig into it and learn how to understand these Hebrew words and what they mean in the context. You'll need a little bit on grammar. I use pictographs because they're absolutely fun to me, but I use them in conjunction with everything else. I've got a ton of stuff I use, and I have it online, and quite frankly, initially I spent several $100s to get enough lexicons, hardcover things, and now so much of it is online, and you just pick which one to speak to you, I guess, or which ones are easiest to read, and you will be able to ascertain about anything there.
Yeah. Now, one thing I think we could do that would be helpful, and it's a big project. I don't know if anybody's looking for a really big project, but a glossary of terms would be a nice addition. So you take the 1,000 words that are used the most, words and names that are used the most, and come up with a amplified definition of those words so that somebody can look up those words without, because if you buy just one lexicon, you are typically going to get misled. You really need 5, 6, or 7 to be able to do the job right. You have to have some sense, Kirk, as you do, of what the letters actually convey in these words. And, of course, there are things that are defined in context. There's a lot that goes to it. But I think a glossary would still help. I also think that a primer on Hebrew grammar would help, particularly with the stem. Yeah. One of the problems is if you look at some of these that have been done, is that they're mostly done on a basis that they just don't have any punch to them. It's the tool that I use is actually a very old one that explains the relationship between the subject and the object relative to the nature of the verb. And so it takes, you're not going to be able to go just to some pedantic academic source and copy and paste. It really is going to take some work, or at least have access to the tools that I use that explain the complex relationship that exists between the subject and the object relative to the action of the verb. But I think that and in a comprehensive explanation of the perfect, the imperfect, and the 3 volitional moods would contribute to somebody's ability to verify this. So I think that would be a useful tool going forward.
Well, most of the interlinearies also will have all that underneath it, so you'll at least know what they're talking about. If you're not a grammarian, you'll at least be able to look and say, "Oh, okay." The online interlinears that I use, it will state the stem, what the conjugation is. It will present that kind of information, and they, because they're electronically linked, you can immediately read if you have forgotten or you just need the verification with the hiffle stem or the call stem or the niffle or any one of these, the hit payal. It will tell you what that stem means relative to the relationship between the subject and the object in the sentence. And even that's a little bit, that's why there's some artistry here, because Hebrew grammar, particularly the old grammar, was not subject, verb, object as we write in English, and even adjectives and adverbs don't typically flow in the same order we would have them in English, like it's not red wagon, but wagon red. It's not set apart spirit, but spirit set apart. So there is a difference, and so there's some artistry involved too. It's you have to do it a long time, I think, and really be passionate about it to get proficient at it. Personally, though, I think the single biggest issue for translating, getting to know Yah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah. I think when you understand Yahweh, who He is, what He's offering, what He cares about, what He expects in return, once you come to know those things, then you will look at the various meanings of words, which many have a dark and a light side, and there's many different connotations, and you'll know, have a better sense as to what aspect of that word's meaning you would apply in this particular sentence. So, I go in with a bias. My bias is I know, I like, I love, I respect Yahweh, and I understand what He is trying to achieve, and my goal is to help other people see that. And so if I have an opportunity to take a word like anah, and it's used in an invitation for us to meet with Yah one of the 7 times during his Moed Mikre, and that the word's primary meaning is to respond and to answer, and its tertiary meaning is to afflict, and it's an invitation from God to do something wonderful for us. Well, I am not going to write afflict, and I'm going to write answer and respond. It just seems reasonable.
Yes. Let's see here. Where are we at? Why the covenant members?
I think we've done 6 or 5 or 6, so whatever.
7.
Okay.
You want to go, Kirk?
Go ahead. You can go.
No, you can read it. Go ahead, Ben.
Okay. Why do some covenant members think that the harvest years such as 2026 or 2029 would be possible? What's the possibility that Dowd will fill the role of ElYah in the spring of 2030 by the way of the Ruwach Kodesh, of the Ruwach Spirit? Is there any statement to support this possibility? Thank you, Shalom, Gene.
First, 2026 or 2029. The absolute earliest that Taruw'ah could be filled in terms of this final harvest would be in 2026. That would be fully 7 years before Yahowah and Dowd return. I think that is unlikely. I hope that's unlikely. We'd have very little time, and Israel would have to fall apart at an alarming rate, although Israel is complying with that at this point. And so the fact there's actually right now, just this evening, the Biden administration put out a press release saying that they're close to having a deal with Saudi Arabia that will incorporate its support for Israel. But what the United States wants is for Israel to cancel judicial reform, to throw out the more conservative members of the current coalition, and to accept the two-state solution. So it is the destruction of Israel that is required for it to have peace with Saudi Arabia. That's the kind of stuff that will accelerate this timeline. The part of this is, if you're reading just the Christian New Testament, you're going to come up with, the tribulation is 7 years and the rapture takes place at the beginning of it. Well, the fact of the matter is that there is no rapture. Tribulation is not a very good reflection of the time of Jacob's troubles. And the time of Jacob's troubles, you would get the sense that it is really the last 3.5 years, with exception of a timeline that is presented by Gabriel, who is Dowd, and to Dany'el. And so we have to be a little bit careful here in that Dany'el was the scribe, and he was a real scallywag. But Dowd obviously knows the timing, and in his presentation, you would have both a full 7-year period and a 3.5-year period. So there's a possibility either way, according to that text. When you're reading Yahowsha, and Yahowsha in 17 is explaining the order of things, you get more of a feel for 2027 as being the most likely time. Maybe 2028. I've come to the conclusion that just knowing Yahowah, that the more time we have, the better, and it's the right mindset for us to have to prepare for as long as we can possibly be here, to help as many people as possible come to know Yahowah, and that puts it at 2029. So that is my preference, just because to say earlier, I think, is defeatist, and to say later is better for God's people. It's better for Yahowah, better for Dowd, better for Yehudim. It's better for everyone if it's late. So that is certainly my preference. The second part of that is that, and by the way, the year that happens, I do not care. Again, the job is to fulfill Taruw'ah, which is to be an effective messenger on behalf of Yahowah's people, to both warn them and to encourage them to come home to Yahowah before it's too late. That's the purpose of it. The purpose of it isn't for the group of us to go off to space camp. That's not the purpose of it. The purpose of it is for us to do what we're doing now. The longer we have to do it, the better. So that's my view on it. The second part of it is that a possibility that Dowd is going to fill the role of ElYah? Absolutely, unequivocally, no. ElYah is going to fill the role of ElYah. The other witness is yours truly. It is not a privilege. It is not an honor. I'm not bragging about it. It's just that it's so obvious when you read the text. There is no other viable candidate, and it is mentioned and hinted at and described in every possible way. There you go. And we're going to arrive in Jerusalem on Pesach Passover, the 14th of Abib, in 2030. That's the timing of all that. And our job is to tell the world, Dowd is returning. Dowd is your Savior. Dowd is the Messiah. He's going to be the King of Kings. Get your act together before it's too late, because if you wait, it will be too late for you. You will not be included. So, are there any statements that support the possibility of it being Dowd? Absolutely not. Are there statements regarding the rest of this? Yeah, it's Malachi, Zakaryah. It's all over Yahshua. But, Yahshua has a vested interest in this, so we've got to take that with not with a grain of salt, because Yahshua is the greatest of the prophets in the sense of the prophetic landscape, and Yahshua had was like all of Yahweh's prophets. No one listened to him when he was delivering this, and no one would for a couple of thousand years thereafter, almost 2,700 years thereafter. And so Yahweh consoled him and said, "Hey, man, trust me. What you have received and revealed is going to play the pivotal role towards the fulfillment of each of the Moed Mikre, both in 33 CE and 2033 CE. And I have arranged it. I'm going to equip and I'm going to prepare. This little Z is going to take care of this. He's going to be your Bashar. He's going to share your words as they were meant to be heard at a time that's going to have a profound effect on your people. So don't stress about this." And so that's why there's so much reference to this in Yahshua.
All right, the next question. Oh, sorry, Kirk, did you have something to say?
No. Go.
Okay.
Carry on.
This was a Jewish woman on Twitter, and this one really intrigued me. She asked, according to a rab's opinion, which is rabbi, we can wish Shabat Shalom to a non-Jew and respond to him, but they are not allowed to observe Shabbat and must be discouraged from being Shomer, which is based on shamar. What are your thoughts on this? And I thought it was interesting.
My thoughts are that I take advice from Yahweh, not from people who have absolutely no authority and that God despises, which would be the rabbis. So I hold the rabbis in contempt, as does God. Yahweh was very focused on the observance of his Shabbat. The difference is Shabbat is a verb in Hebrew, and it speaks of the promise of 7, both promise and 7. And Yahweh is always shown very actively engaged doing things on Shabbat, and it is an actionable concept. So I'm completely opposed to the 1,000 ways to do nothing on the Shabbat that is part of Judaism. I am actually not a big Shabbat Shalom kind of person. That is the common greeting amongst Jews. I've always rebelled against anything that is common or religiously inspired, but I don't refrain from saying it, because I do say it from time as we sign off on this show. I'll say it to anyone. I don't care if a Jew or a non-Jew says it to me. I don't care if I'm saying it to a Jew or a non-Jew. It is irrelevant. The shalom means to reconcile, to have peace in the relationship. It's a wonderful Hebrew term. Yahweh uses it constantly, and Shabbat is a time to celebrate the promise of 7. So both words are powerful in what they convey to us. And I won't play the game of religiosity of what a rabbi says you cannot and can do. As for being observant, that is the problem of rabbinical Judaism. They observe the wrong thing, and they have turned the idea of observance, which is to focus on, to closely examine and carefully consider, into a religion of do this and do that, as if they don't even know what the word means anymore.
Go ahead.
That one really bothered me because, there's a lot of, nobody should be doing what the rabbis say, regardless, and we agree on that. But to discourage people from being shamar, to pay attention, you can't get to Yahweh any other way, and it's totally wicked, in my opinion.
Of course, and of course, the rabbis don't even know his name, so it's for darn sure they're not being observant. But the first requirement for being part of the covenant, and there is no salvation apart from the covenant, is to forego religion. You have to walk away from Babel, religion and politics. And so the very first thing you have to do if you're interested in forming a relationship with Yahowah is to disassociate from the rabbis. So I would strongly encourage doing as God suggests. Next on the list.
You want to take the next one?
Sure. Another few questions we receive often. Congratulations. This is written to you, of course. Congratulations on your marriage. You sound so happy when you talk about your impressive bride on Yada Yahowah show. Since the Torah prophet in Psalms do not specifically outline a process for marriage, how should covenant members approach the marriage contract? Justice of a peace? Are wedding rings okay?
Yeah, I think the answer to the question is as it's described in the Torah, which is there is no ceremony ever. There are no vows ever. There are no laws ever. It is there isn't even a word for marriage, nor is there a word for husband or wife. Isha and Ish simply mean female and male individual. So recognizing that, we ought not try to ascribe rules and ceremonies on ourselves. If you want to share some words with your love and make some promises to them, do so. But be a little careful because people change, situations change. There's just no reason to make commitments that you can't honor. I mean, it's there's such a difference in the presentation of relationships in the Torah. You look at Jacob. He became an indentured servant to be able to marry a very wicked man's daughter, and once he served for 7 years as essentially a slave, an indentured servant, Laban tricked him and gave him Leah. Leah turned out to be the better of the two anyway, but he didn't know that at the time. He had to work another 7 years as a slave to get the second one. And that wasn't enough because, well, they started playing handmaidens too, and, he had children that would represent the 12 tribes of Israel through 12 handmaids who were essentially slaves. So God's view of this is not the monogamous view that is purported and promoted by religion. You look at Dowd, the man that Yah loved the most. He had 8 wives, and I don't even know what the right term is. Concubine is such I think a pejorative term. I think he genuinely loved these women, and I don't think these women were his property. But so he had 10 lovers in addition to 8 wives. God never had an issue with any of that. His only issue was really how he went about acquiring his eighth wife. That God said, that what you did there was really pretty miserable. It's disgusting what you did. But God's view of this is that maybe man isn't as monogamous as we think, and that relationships need an out clause, and his out clause was write a letter to your spouse. But I understand that, there are men and even more women who like the security of, I've got to document this person's mine, and they're committed to me because, they've said vows and they've got this document, and, that's not my mindset. My mindset is, if you're unhappy with me in a relationship, go. You're free to go. If you're happy with our relationship, then by all means stay. So I guess it's a little different with me than it would be for others. But I just try to take the Torah's point of view, which is there's no ceremony. There are no vows. There are no promises. There's no terminology for it. The closest thing you get really is the Bereth covenant. And so you can apply some of those principles. As for the wedding rings, I personally don't have any jewelry, so I don't wear a watch or a ring or a necklace or anything. No piercings, no tattoos, no nothing. Leah, my wife, whom I followed exactly this advice that I'm sharing with you now, does wear a ring. And part of that, too, is that we live in a society that if a woman's not wearing a wedding ring, men are very forward. And so it's a comfort to her in that regard. And I think she looks at it and says, okay, this is where I am in this relationship, and she enjoys that place. I enjoy her being in that place, and so I don't think there's anything wrong with the ring. I think it's comforting, and it's also a bit protective. Those are my thoughts.
Okay.
I remember Jacob or Yitzchak gave Rachel jewelry as a gift, and when you look at Hosea 2:19, it's aras ata. I'm going to request that you be with me. It's an engagement proposal. Mm-hmm. There's no ceremony, and it's interesting that the writ of divorce is the anti-aras ata. It's undoing the pledge. It's just I'm canceling this out. So it's really and the Torah too. It was the tent is the big thing. So if you moved someone into your tent or you moved into their tent, you were effectively acting as if you were married. And once you begin to act like you are married, there are certain responsibilities in the way that you will treat one another and communicate with one another and support one another and support your children if you have them, but even just support one another in a home environment. So there are responsibilities that you look at Chawah. She was given to Adam as a means of support. So we are to support one another, and I think there are responsibilities in any relationship that make the relationship meaningful. And if you're not willing to if both parties aren't willing to contribute, it just does not work.
Mm-hmm. That's good advice.
I would say one other thing too is that the world is very hung up on sexuality, Islam, Judaism, Christianity, very hung up on what is appropriate and inappropriate sexually. Yahweh is not a cosmic killjoy. He designed us as we are, and I think he very much wants us to explore and enjoy sexuality and to have fun with it and be creative with it and bring each other pleasure with it. And there are really no restrictions other than don't do lammies and goats. That's a really demeaning and disgusting thing. Don't take advantage of another man when just because you've become victorious in war and sodomize them. That's really disgusting. Don't do your sons and daughters. Don't do your mothers and fathers. Rape is a really bad thing. Pedophilia is a really bad thing, and incest is a really bad thing. It's just these are all things that are exceedingly destructive to human relationships and the development of our development in a family setting. So these things that God speaks out against, but otherwise, he had no problem with Adam and Chawah being completely naked. They had no problem being naked, and I'm sure they figured out how their various parts fit together, and there was some pleasure and enjoyment from that. So God's very, very supportive, I think, of sexuality. I think he invented it. I think he did it so that we could live rich and fulfilling lives.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Says the newlywed man who is now all choked up, saying, "Yeah, okay, I like that stuff too." Okay. Do we have?
That's a good.
You're going to have to read the next one, Dee. I think you're more composed than.
Yeah, I think so. Go, Dee.
Okay. Will souls who are not part of Yahweh's covenant family, but did not mislead others in Yah's name, dissipate directly after their mortal existence concludes?
The fact of the matter is that we're not told, and one of the reasons we're not told is that time, as it relates to Yahweh, is just entirely different from us. So, if, for example, Dowd had a period of suspended animation between lives 1 and 2, and between 2 and 3, Dowd wouldn't even know it. It would just be one moment to the next, and so it's immaterial, and it would be immaterial on people who are going to dissipate because they do not know Yahweh, and immaterial on people who are going to end up in Sheol. I think that it makes the most sense for those who are going to end up in Sheol to be in a suspended animation, so one moment they're dead, the next moment, from their perspective, they're being judged, but those moments may be 1,000 years apart. But it will be immediate from their perspective. And I think there's no reason to awaken somebody who does not know Yahweh, but who didn't lead in a material way lots of people astray, unless it is to awaken them so that they can witness those who may have seriously abused them or those they love for recompense. And I think they're entitled to that. But otherwise, I don't think it matters. Next.
Okay.
Kind of next two, doesn't it? Where the next two, I think it's the same answer would apply here. Where are the souls of Paul and Akiba currently waiting for judgment?
Yeah, I think that. I think I just answered that, which is it would be foolish to send them off to Sheol and then bring them back for judgment. Mm-hmm. Right? That's just ridiculous. God's not ridiculous. So the thing that makes the most sense is that they're put in a suspended animation. From their point of view, it was they died, and the next cognitive moment will be they will be there in the process of being judged. And so for them, it will look like an instant, but it will also give us the opportunity to do the right thing and to send them not only into Sheol, but explain the reasons that they're going there.
Yeah, this is bordering on purgatory, which is absolutely not in the Torah anywhere to be found.
No purgatory.
Yeah. So is soul sleep a real thing? Before Dowd's sacrifice, did all souls go to Sheol or a place of waiting? Similar question.
Yeah, I think that's the same thing we've been talking about. Is that we're not told. We do know that Dowd, for a period, went into a altered state of consciousness. There was the Hebrew word for sleep was used as it relates to altered consciousness. So there is the possibility that Dowd would have said, "I want to do this. I want to be brought back in year 4000. I want to fulfill the Moed Mikra," and he may have been kept in a suspended animation from the moment he lived his first life to the second. I actually think that makes more sense, because if he had spent that 1,000 years in Shamaym in heaven, and then after being a 7-dimensional creature and spending all this wonderful time with Yahweh, had to go down there and live 30 years as a human or 33 years as a human, and then suffer in this way. That seems to be meaner. So I'm hoping it was that from his point of view, I go from one moment to the next, as if there was no 1,000-year gap in this process. With one exception, I would think it would be more fair to Dowd to give him the same thing that I hope that I get, that ElYah I'm certain has, which is that prior to coming back as one of the two witnesses, I'm hoping there is that 6 months of spending it with Yahowah, being recharged. There'd be a level of confidence and a level of commitment that would go with that I think is important in reinforcing. And so I think it probably happened with Dowd. I think it's happening with ElYah. I hope it happens with us too, so that it's kind of a little bit of a blend, mostly suspended animation, but sometime there just as reinforcement.
Well, in that vein, are the souls of covenant family who have died immediately transformed into light and adopted into Yah's family in Shamaym?
Yeah, but this is again details over the big picture. Since time does not flow for a four-dimensional creature, much less a seven-dimensional creature, the way it does for us. So from Yahweh's perspective, we can go from one life to the next in an instant, and have no waiting around, and there could be a 1,000-year gap between them. So, and from our perspective, we wouldn't know if there's a gap or no gap. We'd have no way of knowing if we go directly to Shamaym with Yahowah, or if there is a gap of 7 years or 10 years or that sort of thing. So it's just that we need to understand that time does not move and flow at the same rate and is not perceived the same way by a seven-dimensional creature that it is by a three-dimensional creature, and we're going to become seven-dimensional creatures. So the answer is it doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter, and I wouldn't be concerned about it. And really, Yah was not in a position to tell us about these kinds of things on time, because we're just in a different situation. We're stuck in the ordinary flow of it. He's not. Time is perceived completely different by him, and it will be perceived completely different by us. So I wouldn't get caught up on the detail of time. It's where you're going, and the fact that you're going to have these increases all the way into the dimensions beyond your comprehension.
Yeah. Well, the next question is that you've calculated the date of October 2nd, 2033, based on the death of, Yahowsha, the Pesach Lamb, Dowd. Yeah, it's Dowd.
Yeah.
However, now that we know that Dowd is our actual Pesach Ayil and that he died on another date, and I don't know why she says that, what is the new calculated date of Yahweh's return with Dowd?
Yeah. First of all, it was Dowd's body in 33 that would have succumbed as a sacrificial lamb. Dowd's soul, which is the part that matters, spent one day in Sheol on Matzah, and then he is clearly back with his father at this point, because that was part of Kipurym. It is Dowd who, as Gabriel, gives us the timeline for himself, that the exact date the Mashiach would walk into Jerusalem and be sacrificed with his own people, creating a covenant in opposition to him. And when you do the math on that, you end up 4 days before Pesach Passover in 33 CE. So that's just the math, and Dowd's the name. That's the day that he predicted that he would arrive. What you have is the following dates are easily discernible from the Torah. That it was year 0 when Adam and Chava were booted from the garden. It was 40 Yobel thereafter, which would be 1968 BCE, Abraham and Yitzhak affirmed the conditions of and their support of the covenant on Mount Moriah, where Yahweh said, when we do this again, I will supply the lamb. Exactly 40 Yobel later, Dowd served as the Pesach Ayil. That would be in 33 CE. Each of those dates are exactly 40 Yobel, or 2,000 years apart. And we know that from many ways of deducing this, that it was in 33 CE that Dowd fulfilled the first 4 Mikre. And so if you add 40 Yobel to that, what do you end up with? 2033. What is the next Moed Mikre to be fulfilled? It is Kipurym. What day is Kipurym fulfilled in 2033? It begins at sundown 6:22 p.m. in Jerusalem on October 2nd, and that year of year 6000 Yah. Now, if you were to say, is it possible that I'm off by 24 hours and that Kipurym will last until October 3rd at 6:22? You got me. I could be 24 hours off. The reason I never talk about the end of Kipurym is that while Matzah is the most important day for us, Kipurym is the most important day for Yahweh. And the idea that Yahweh is going to return at the last minute of the most important day and the happiest day for him, the reunion of he and his people, seems ludicrous to me. So I think Yahweh wants to soak up every possible minute of that today, of Yom Kippurim and year 6000 Yah, and he should be like a father that wants to be there for his son or daughter's first steps. I cannot imagine him delaying 1 second after beyond what is necessary. So you can shoot me if I'm wrong by 24 hours, but I'm going to be real surprised if the father I know doesn't want to hurry back, and I'm going to be real disappointed if we don't succeed in having a quality audience looking up at that.
In my opinion, I think that Yahweh does everything he can, that when we're right and correct about him, to try to bolster us in return. And I just don't see Yahweh, in my opinion. If he was going to come at a later time, he'll probably come earlier just because you wrote it so many times. I mean, that's just, I would. My friend did that for me. I would be like, I'm going to come 5 hours earlier because I want to support Yada. I would do that for my friend. So that's just my personal opinion. Can't prove it.
Yeah. So I think we're on pretty solid ground that's going to happen earlier. All right.
So
we're still recording. We're no longer broadcasting. Let's see if we can get through the rest of these because I know that my friend Dr. Jeff had a question and we haven't come to it yet, and I hope we get to it before we stop recording. So what's the next one on your list?
Okay. Craig mentioned that you're speaking to Dany'el, even though the conversation was recorded nearly 2,600 years ago. Unless he's reading it wrong, it's a hard one for his mind to comprehend.
Yeah, of course it is hard to. Why is it hard to comprehend? Because we are trapped in the ordinary flow of time. We do not see time as something that can be maneuvered in, which Yahweh does. What did Yahweh do with his prophets? He took them from their time forward in time to witness something and then back in time to write about it. Correct? So God's fully capable of taking somebody forward in time and then having them see what's going to happen and then taking them back in time for them to write about it. Correct? Yeah. So why would it be, why would you limit him and say, well, you can't take somebody forward in time, back in time? God has seen this whole thing is all played out. He's witnessed the entire thing, and so I don't think it's difficult. It's just very difficult for us to wrap our minds around because we're stuck in the ordinary flow of time. God's not restricted in that way. So again, it's a detail. I understand how the details seem important to folks. I wouldn't worry about that so much, because so many of these questions are over time. And the key thing to understand is in Hebrew, the Hebrew language is liberated in time. All the verbs are true throughout time. They're either speak of a completed event in the past, present, or future, or an ongoing event, but they're never locked into past, present, or future. They're liberated in time. That's the nature of the Hebrew language. Yahweh equates himself to light. Light is independent of time. On a photon of light, time simply exists. It's the fullness of time on a photon of light. And even the flow of time is relative to the observer and the presence of energy and velocity. So the more you come to appreciate the integration of time into the Hebrew language and into light, which Yahweh ascribes for himself, and as it plays out in the fourth dimension on our way to the seventh, the more comfortable you will be with all of these issues over being stuck in the flow of time versus being liberated in time, so that the time becomes an entirely different concept. What do we have next?
Kirk, do you want to read 28? Let's go ahead and address Jeff's question.
Yeah, let's do. Let me pull down the
then we can backfill.
Can you explain how you would approach sharing Zakaryah 12:10 with Jews who do not acknowledge or have a clue that this passage is about Dowd? Christian apologists often use this passage to try to prove that Jesus, quote unquote, was pierced. Then, when in fact due to interpretation.
The reason I knew about this question is that Dr. Jeff's my good friend, and we've been brothers for a long time. He was one of the very first that came to trust, to know, trust, to rely upon Yahweh through these translations we were doing. And he's just a great friend, a great mind, a wonderful, rational Yahud. And dearly love the man. And he and I talk regularly. He called me this afternoon, and I asked him if he was a contributor to the questions, and he told me that this was his. So to answer the question, the first thing is it certainly can't be Jebus, because it begins by Yahweh saying that this pertains to him. So Yahweh uses his own name, and he speaks of pouring out his spirit on the people at this time in Jerusalem. He does mention a second name, and it most certainly isn't Jesus. The second name he mentions is Dowd. In fact, he mentions Dowd in the prelude to all of this, because it is the house of Dowd, the family of Dowd, that he's pouring out this spirit of compassion and reconciliation. The next part of it is that there's a very important word in all of this in terms of piercing, and it is eth. And what eth means is it draws a connection between things, an association between things. And it says that as he returns, they will look upon the one with whom he is returning, whom they have pierced, and will mourn for him. And as he finishes this, he has three different words for a son and firstborn son. There's only one person throughout the Torah and prophets that Yahweh refers to as his son, and he specifically gives the title of Bakor, firstborn, to Dowd. So Dowd is the one that Yahweh goes out of his way and says, I'm his father, he is my son, and repeats that. It's even repeated in 89th Mizmowr. And Dowd is the only one that is called the Bakor by Yahweh, his firstborn. This whole thing is about mourning for the firstborn. So the person that was pierced was the firstborn, the Son of God, and the Yehudim that are gathered for reconciliations on this day, October 2nd at sundown, 6:22 p.m. And 33 CE, year 6000. Yeah. Mm-hmm. The thing that is going to just cause our eyes to well up in tears and us to cry bitterly, even while we're thrilled and excited to be in Yahweh's company, is that we humans tortured God's son. We drove stakes through, nails through his hands and his feet and hung him from the most excruciating form of death ever designed. And that was the easy part, because the hard part is that with his soul, he carried our guilt into Sheol and deposited it there so we would look perfect in God's eyes. Now, when you see somebody that did that for you, you're going to be really emotional.
Yeah.
So, God's a spiritual being. It's really, really tough to nail a spiritual being. The nails just don't stick. But the whole thing is about the Son, who is the one that we pierced. So, Jews, what you're missing is every time it talks about the fulfillment prophetically of the Passover, by the Passover Lamb, by the Zarowa, it's always addressing Dowd. It's in first person. It is Dowd's sacrifice, and you missed it. Dowd says that he's pierced. He describes Roman crucifixion 1,000 years before it was invented. And here God's saying, yeah, I'm coming back with Dowd. I'm telling you that. And when you see the one that you pierced, you are really going to bawl your eyes out. The first time I told Leah, she was sitting here, she just moved back into the same chair she was in when I told her this about 6 months ago, that the Passover Lamb is Dowd. He's the one that suffered that torture and then carried our guilt with him into Sheol. I expected her to have the same reaction I did, which is to celebrate that it's all now comes together. Dowd chose to fulfill this. We understand why. What a great celebration. The Messiah is our Savior. Isn't it? He is the Zarowa. She started crying and didn't stop for 5 or 6 hours. And I think that every Jew that is there at that reunion is going to do the same thing, because it wasn't just that that this happened for their benefit. Is that the Jewish people for the past 2,000 years have denied it. It's one thing for him to have done it. It's another thing for his people to have denied him, and that's going to be really painful. So that's my answer, Jeff. So let's go back, Phil, on some of these other questions.
Well, there was a part 2 of that question.
Okay.
Yeah, he asked that most Jews are not allowed to speak God's name and are not aware that God also has a son, a question that Yah himself asks in Mishal 30, verse 4. So how would you explain to Jews that the Son of God, who is a human... Oh, hi, I have a visitor. Sorry. How would you explain that?
Yeah. I don't think it's necessary to explain to Jews that God has a son, because God says he does. He introduces it in probably the most important prophecy in all of prophecies, which is 2 Samuel 7. And he specifically speaks of Dowd not only returning as the King of Kings, and of Yahweh establishing his seat of honor and building a house for him and all of these wonderful things, but he specifically says, he's my son, I'm his father. And Mizmowr 89, which is the most important document probably ever written, apart from the Torah, and in some ways it's as important as the Torah, Yahweh says again, I am his father, he is my son. And he is specifically introduced as the Bikor, the firstborn. Yeah. He is the exemplar for the covenant. So God makes the statement, if you don't like the fact that God picked this man to be his firstborn son to inherit the heavens and the earth and then share it with us, you go pick your fight with God. It's not going to work out real well for you, but God loved Dowd, and Dowd loved God. Their father and son.
Jeff and I were talking. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, everything that God did, though, achieved with Dowd in terms of the benefits of the covenant that they achieved together, they apply to all of us. So rather than fight it, say, yeah, I'm delighted that they were father and son, that they worked together in the fulfillment of the mikveh, because we're the beneficiaries. So celebrate it. If God says that he is my son, and he repeats it, and then has all these other accolades, including that he's my firstborn, and he gets the inherited share of the firstborn, why would God lie to you? And if you're saying it's not true, then you're calling God a liar. God, by the way, holds him accountable. In the 89th Mizmowr says, if this is not all true about Dowd, then I am a liar. What do you think the chances are of that?
That's a good point.
All right. Why don't we go for another? We have a few minutes left.
This question's been a long time coming. After discovering books written by false prophets, how many times does Yahweh's name now appear in the Torah, Naby and Mizmowr?
Oh yeah, I get this all the time. I think the number is 7,000. Yes, it is true that Ezekiel has a field day with Yahweh's name because Hasatan wants to be Yahweh. So it's over 100 times in that book. And so you would take that from the original estimate of 7,000, and you'd have 6,900. But if you're doing your homework, one of the things you'll quickly learn is that we don't have the full cadre of Mizmowr. There are, in the Dead Seas, there are many Mizmowr that are not part of the current collection that Dowd wrote. And we don't have the entirety of them, we just have parts of them. We don't know how many times Yahweh's name is mentioned in them, but we do know one thing. Dowd mentions Yahweh's name a lot. And we have many places, somewhere between 150 and 250, where the Dead Sea Scrolls replace where the Master Reads completely erased Yahweh's name and replaced it with their Adonai, where Yahweh's name is in the older text. So you are, with those thoughts, so close to being back to 7,000. You're going to be back to 6,900 and some odd. What are the odds that it's not 7,000? Again, when you know Yahweh and you know his predilection for the number 7, and you are within 5% of a magnificent number like that, what is the likelihood that it isn't found in the additional Mizmowr or the corrections to the Masoretic text? Masoretic text is wrong by 7%. 7% of the time, the Masoretic text is just flat out wrong. And as you compare it to the Dead Sea Scrolls, and so you've got a 7% factor there. 7% of 7,000 is far more than the mentions of Yahweh and Ezekiel.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's a really good point.
I haven't changed the number from 7,000 because I just don't think there's any reason to, considering the additional Mizmowr, the 7th error factor in the Masoretic text, and the fact that we have Dead Sea Scrolls for every book that actually belongs in Yahweh's Torah and prophets. We don't have the entirety of all those books, and so if you were to factor in what we're missing in the places where Yahweh's name would appear, I'm confident the number is still 7,000.
Right.
I'm also questioned all the time now, as I've said, 40 prophets, and now we have eliminated prophets like Jonah. He was not a prophet. Job was not a prophet. Ezekiel most certainly was not a prophet. Dany'el wasn't even a prophet. So how many prophets were there? Well, before I changed the number, one of the things I did is I went through the entirety of the Torah, prophets, and Psalms and referenced every time that Yahweh referred to somebody as a prophet. And if you take the names out that I've just mentioned, but you include every time that Yahweh refers to somebody as a prophet. Guess what the number is?
40.
40. Now, for example, Yahweh actually says that Abraham was a prophet. Now, we have prophecies from Abraham in the sense of all of the terms and conditions of the covenant turned out to be prophetic, and of course the whole episode that took place at the fulfillment of the covenant on Mount Moriah was prophetic.
Yeah.
So if I was going to call Abraham a prophet, I'm going to buy the fact that Abraham is a prophet.
Yeah.
Clearly, the 89th Mizmowr is prophetic, and you would not normally include the author as a prophet, but you'd have to when you're reading through it. So anyway, the answer is I did do, because it's mentioned every time now that I use the term 40 as the edit team goes by. Are you sure? I did the study, and it really is 40.
Okay.
It's again one of those numbers. It's so close. What are the odds that it's not? And this one, it was just easy to check. So I checked it. I can probably get to 6,900 without batting an eye on the use of Yahowah, and then it is it worth the added 5 or 6 days worth of work to try to go through the Mizmowr that, for example, that are not included in the current assemblage, and then to try to figure out every place where there is an Adonai and a text that is not supported by the Masoretic, or excuse me, not supported by a Qumran text where it could have been a Yahowah. I don't know. I think not, just because Yahweh is a perfectionist. The number is 7,000. Okay, another question?
I'd like to go to 20 for our friend Mary. I hear this all the time. You'd be shocked how many people think this in the covenant family. So she writes, someone told me they doubt they would be included in the Taruw'ah Harvest, but they think they will come afterwards when Yah and Dowd return on Kipurym for the chosen remnant. They say, isn't it enough that I believe and keep the feasts? What do you think?
Well, my first reaction is to say, what? Okay, so what they want the fulfillment of Taruw'ah to follow the fulfillment of Kipurym and of Sukkah, so that Yahweh would go from fulfilling Pesach, Matzah, Bikurim, and Shabuah in order, skip Taruw'ah, do Kipurym and Sukkah, and then backtrack to Taruw'ah?
They just think they're going to be special and left behind.
Okay, so that is not going to happen. He's going to fulfill them in order.
No.
And so Taruw'ah will precede Kipurym. The other thing about Taruw'ah is, again, the day we go to space camp is nice and everything, but the purpose of Taruw'ah is to do what we're doing. And so if you focus on what the purpose of Taruw'ah is, as opposed to the going away part of Taruw'ah, then the timing of it really isn't nearly as important as getting the job done between now and then. Okay, now in terms of observing the mikre being the determining factor as to whether you get in or don't get in, that's really not true. The determination of whether you are in or not in is the acceptance of the terms and conditions of the covenant. The benefits of the covenant are provided through the Moed Mikre. It is important that we answer Yahweh's invitations and we meet with him and we come to appreciate how each of the 7 Moed Mikre enable us to have a wonderful relationship with our Heavenly Father. But the criterion for being included in the hereafter are the terms and conditions of the covenant, which is why Abraham happens to be a prophet, because they're prophetically revealed through him. So I said I would focus more on your relationship with Yahweh and your acceptance of the terms and conditions of the covenant, and then celebrate the Moed Mikre as Yahweh's and Dowd's means to provide the benefits of the covenant to you, which are eternal life being perfected by having your guilt hauled away and disposed of in Sheol, by Dowd being adopted into Yahweh's family, being enriched and empowered by him, so that we can do this job of Taruw'ah, which is to share this testimony that Dowd and his father Yahweh will be returning on Yom Kipurym, 6:22 p.m., October 2nd, and 2033, year 6000 Yah. I'm having fun with that because I'm just so convinced that this is who Yahweh is. There'd be no reason for him to delay, and so and this is my I think you've gotten a feel for this. This is my style. I enjoy my relationship with Yahweh. He's my father. He's my friend, and I think it's fun to presume things that seem to be so obvious based upon the nature of who he is in the relationship. But no, I think it's there's two errors in there. One is that the Moed Mikre are fulfilled in order. He's not going to go out of order. And second, the criterion for who's in and who's out happens to be the covenant. And so I'd pay more attention to the terms and conditions of the covenant than I would with the Moed Mikre. The Moed Mikre are essential. We should definitely respond to Yahweh's invitations and understand what these things represent. But they are gifts from our Father and his Son to us. Our gift to him is being a contributing member of the covenant, somebody who is making Yahweh's existence richer and reaching out to his people to help them come home and to know their Father.
Beautiful.
I think we probably have time for one more before, it's got to be a quick one before we're cut off, because we're going to, within a minute or two, we're going to hear that goodbye.
So what happens to children and grandchildren of a covenant family member during Taruw'ah? I'm assuming they're not covenant.
If you're, we've talked about this before. If like in your case, you have a very young child who, even though she may already qualify because she clearly knows Yahweh, she speaks of Yahweh, she loves Yahweh, you've raised her to know and to love Yahweh, and you've set an example where knowing Yahweh and being part of the covenant is something wonderful. I think it's a large degree why Jackie has so many family members that are part of the covenant, is that she radiates the beauty of being part and the joy of being part of God's family, and it's contagious, you know. I want what you have. What you have is really wonderful. So I think it's possible with young children, and Jackie has it too, where the even very young children know Yahweh and enjoy his company. So young children, if haven't yet reached the age where they can make that decision, get to go with the parents. That's one of the joys of being a covenant member, is our children are not left behind. Once our children are of the age where they can make their own decision, like I have two, one has chosen covenant, one has chosen not. They either remain or come based upon their own choices, is the answer to that question. So very young dependent children will come with you if you're a covenant member, and your adult children will either come or stay, totally dependent upon the choices they have made. I don't think we're going to have time for any more, so I think probably the best thing to do is to wish everyone a wonderful Shabbat. I think we probably got to the vast majority of them. I hope so. And we'll return to the 89th Mizmowr this time next week. Thank you all for listening. Thank you for making such wonderful contributions to Yahweh's family. And hopefully we'll do a Q&A again. My sense is this time I was probably a little more, what's the right term? I shared more from the heart. This is how I've incorporated the answers to these questions, and not willing to go into the detail as much as wanting to share the big picture. And I hope maybe that was helpful because we had so many questions on timing issues and details as opposed to, you want to know about Taruw'ah, do Taruw'ah.
Right.
Do Taruw'ah, and everything will take care of itself. By doing Taruw'ah, in fact, I think one of my friends, Mike, wanted to know is that's something we'll have to do maybe next time, but wanted to know if Taruw'ah had a dark and light side, and it does. It's like most Hebrew words. Where was I think there's a Mike question here someplace, but it really depends on Ruwach is the active verb in Taruw'ah, and Ruwach means to signal both an alarm and to convey, herald a positive message. And then there's two variations of ta'ab. One is to celebrate something and desire it, and the other is to loathe it. And they're written exactly the same way. And so the ta before Ruwach can either be cast as to dispel this idea of and to loathe the idea of conveying the message, or to desire it and love it. So it's like Anna and so many other words that have a dark and light side, and you have to pick the right one based upon the use of the word. Anyway, we return to the 89th Mizmowr this time next week, and I do hope to share some of the things that I wrote today, because I think they would make an interesting influence in the people's lives. And I guess the last thing to share is that focus on the big picture. We all love the details and how they're woven into this plan, and Yahweh's dates and the timing and how he approaches things. But it's the big picture that matters. Do you want to be part of God's family, his Berith covenant? Are you willing to accept the terms and conditions, which there are 5? Do you understand how the benefits, which are 5, are provided by the fulfillment of the Moed Mikra? Do you understand how Yahweh chose, and so did Dowd volunteered, to be the person that Yahweh worked with to make those things possible? And how coming to know Dowd as the Zarowa and our Savior is so essential to Yahweh, because he's proud of his son, and his son did something truly magnificent, and his people have rejected him. So there's very few things as important as coming to appreciate what he has done for us, and to share it, so that Yahweh's people disengage from politics and religion and come to know, trust, and love Yahweh as their father, Dowd as their brother, in addition to being king and savior. So that's a lot for one show. We were lucky Blog Talk Radio didn't kick us off at 9:05. I guess they knew we had things to talk about. But thank you again for the questions. I hope that you benefit from these answers. May Yah bless you all. Good night.
Good night.
Night, guys.
Night.